Let's talk to Andrew, who is calling in from Maine. Andrew, you are live on Talk Heathen. What's up?
Hi. Yeah, I called to talk about abortion, but can I really, that guy really comment on something supernatural, or do you want to focus on abortion?
We would prefer that you stick to the topic that you agreed to with the call screener, if you don't mind.
Okay. I only was triggered by what he just said, but I'll stick to the topic. So sure. I called in to say that the abortion decision actually leads to a more democratic process because it throws it back to state representatives who are elected as opposed to enforcement.
Andrew, that's so funny.
Man. Well, no, let him finish. Okay. I'm an ignorant Canadian. I need to hear this.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Final part. Yeah, my final comment on that was, I hear people complain about, my rights this, my rights that, but the question is, where do your rights come from? Why are you entitled to those? And I think when people actually examine that, they find some troubling questions. So that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah. Hey, Andrew, when people were owned as slaves and states had the right to determine whether you could be a slave or not, do you think that was a good idea or a bad idea?
No, obviously, I think it was bad, and we eventually...
Well, hold on. Wait, Andrew, wait. It's states' rights, though. It's a more democratic process, right? Because that's what you're arguing here.
Yeah, and eventually we got to the place where the states don't enforce that. So I don't know what you're trying to say.
So it's almost as if the state shouldn't enforce other people. Particularly when it comes to their liberties and maybe what they do with their own bodies.
So the states, I don't know what you're. The states. Well, it's more democratic at this point in time because
it's not democratic because guess what, Andrew? We did not vote for the Supreme Court. I did not vote for the Supreme Court. Did you vote for the Supreme Court? No, we did not vote for the Supreme Court. The president. No, I'm not finished, Andrew. The president, 5 Supreme Court justices, might I add, were not chosen by the popular president, chosen by the unpopularly elected president, got to decide who got to be on the court. And that court decided that the states were going to be making those choices. Now, I did not get to vote on what the state, my state of Texas, decided for women. This was not a democratic process in no freaking conception of that term. Absolutely not. And I have to bring this up. States' rights, this idea that states is a more democratic way, all that means is a better way to eliminate the rights of other people. It means unequal rights for all American citizens because now all U.S. citizens do not have same rights. There are some people in some states that have more rights than in other states.
Okay, so that's the reason I say that is because the Supreme Court, you're right, it's not elected. And all they did was they gave the decision to the elected people. So now the elected people, which presumably represent the will of the people who elect them, they are the ones who make the decision now. So it is more democratic.
So I have a question. Yeah. And this is a legit question. Do you think that democracy is the best way to make these sorts of decisions?
I'm not sure what I think is the best way. I mean, obviously I have my opinions on what should be done, but I haven't really thought about what I think is the best way. But I know that people
think about this. If there is, so assume that an entire population votes, 100% voting turnout, and 60% belongs to one group and 40% belongs to another group. And everyone votes, and the group that is in the majority, the 60%, continually vote to marginalize and disadvantage the 40%. Is that a good way to make these decisions? Should everything be decided by democratic election and democratic voting? Does that lead to a fair and just society?
If you're trying to draw an analogy with America, that's not a good analogy. There are checks and balances and different parties come to power.
I'm literally asking if democracy is the best way to solve these sorts of problems. And I'm Canadian, right? So I ask these questions in the context of my political situation as well.
Pure democracy with no checks and balances, probably not. But I would not say that's what America has right now.
So what kind of checks and balances do you think that we should have? Do you think maybe we should all agree that people should have a certain set of rights, and those rights are not democratically chosen? Those rights are declared as all rights. So if you think about it, because you're right, rights are not granted. Rights are declared. People decide, I decide that I have this right and I want all people to have this right. And so rights are demanded, declared by groups of people. And then a government may choose to, grant that in like a legal sense. But the question is, should we be voting on what those rights are, or should we be using some other process to determine what someone's rights are?
I think ideally you say your rights come from God, but I think obviously a lot of people disagree with that. But my point is,
most people in the world would probably disagree with what you think the rights granted to you by God are, right? Because most people do not have your religion.
Yeah. So my point, though, is especially people who, at the end of the day, if you don't believe in your rights come from some higher source, it's just, arbitrary people saying, oh, my rights are this. And there's I don't know if you, at that point, you say, oh, consensus is the determining factor. Oh, it's just the party in power has the determining factor. But there's no real solid foundation there anyways. So, to complain about your rights seems kind of silly to me.
Well, the fact is, you can either do something that's legal by the state or you can't, right? So, rights are like an objective thing you can look at. Wherever they come from, right? That seems like a red herring, right? The fact that you are deciding that the state, individual states, is somehow a more democratic process than giving it on a federal level, that is what I take issue with. Because again, I posit the point that all that means is that some people in some states are going to have rights and some people in other states are not going to have rights. And that is the problem that I'm trying to demonstrate here. Again, it used to be the case in this country that individual slave owners were recognized by their states as having the right to own other people. It used to be that you could marry another woman of color and that would be considered illegal in some places and fine in other places. It used to be that you could marry someone of the same sex and not be recognized in some states because individual states' rights didn't give people those liberties. It's because we made that on a federal level that we granted across all states that everybody, all U.S. citizens could have that right. What has happened is that we've had those rights taken away. We did not make it more democratic. We did not make it more equal for people. We've taken rights away. We've not expanded our rights for people. This isn't, in my opinion, Andrew, this is not a good way to live. Not a good way to, have rights. If it can just be arbitrarily taken away at a state level, to me, that doesn't seem fair. Even if it's by our quote unquote elected representatives, right? Because if 55% of the country wants one thing and 45% wants another thing, suddenly you're taking away the rights for those 55%.
Yeah,
by doing this.
Really, you're just backing whoever supports your decision, because if the Supreme Court had the opposite opinion and said, oh, abortions are illegal everywhere, you probably wouldn't have said, oh, that's a better method. I think it should be determined somehow. So abortion was only protected by...
I'm of the opinion that women should have rights and people of uteruses should have rights. Period.
Okay, but I'm saying that the Supreme Court, which is unelected, was protecting abortion, and now it's not protected by an unelected body. So the elected body is going to be the one making the decision. And if people don't like the elected body's decisions, they'll vote in new people. So it is more representative of the will of the people, whether you like it or not.
Why does that matter?
I think.
Why does that matter?
Oh, okay.
That's the point I was making. Is it's more representative of the will of the people, whether you like it or not.
Why does that matter? Does the will of the people have anything to do with someone's rights?
Apparently, according to Dan, it does, because the rights need to be declared by a government. So according to him, yes.
No, they need to be enforced by a government.
No, he said declared. He said as long as it's declared somewhere. And you're probably ignoring the fact that in the context it does mention God. So, I mean, you're probably just ignoring that as well.
Well, it should be ignored because we shouldn't be a state that's based on any religion. But besides that, I don't give a shit. Let me get this, Andrew. I don't give a shit if the Supreme Court says this should be a thing or not be a thing. I think people with uteruses should have rights. I don't know what you're not getting about this. Yeah, is it an unelected body of officials that are enforcing these rights and deciding these rights? Yes. Whether they're elected body official or non-elected body officials, they should have those rights. Period. Like at the end of the day, they should have those rights. I'm not saying that because the current state is enforcing it that means that they should have rights or not. That's not even where I'm coming from. And besides this, the elections in our country are gerrymandered to the point where they are not equally representative of the nation as a whole. Again, most people in this country wanted abortion to be legal. More than half. This is a known statistic. And yet, as we come to now, we are finding that states are not giving it to all those people that do want it. Right? We are making it illegal for some places and legal in other places.
I mean, the bottom line is the people who are deciding are elected, whether or not you don't like the jurisdictions. I mean, but
can I ask you a question, Andrew?
What?
So you're aware of like the International Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, right? Like started as the Geneva Convention after the Second World War. A bunch of groups from the UN got together and they said, here are the rights that we all agree should be granted to everyone in the world. Okay?
Okay.
What happens if some other country doesn't have laws that enforce those rights or recognize those rights? Do the people in that country have rights or do they not have rights? Say, for instance, one of the things in the Geneva Convention is you can't torture people, okay? You can't torture a civilian. And yet some countries will torture people. Do those people living in those countries, do they have the right to not be tortured or do they not have it?
I mean, it all depends on where you think rights come from. I think that they have the right not to be tortured because I believe that that's a thing that comes from God. If you take your rights from the government, then yes, the government has the right to torture them if that's not outlawed.
Okay, all right, fine. I'll play ball with you. So if you think that rights come from God, then what does anyone have? Why is anyone voting on it? Why is it a good thing to have a democratic process around it? You're saying that it's a good thing that it's democratic. And if we don't agree with it, we can move it out. But you think that all rights come from God anyways.
No, my argument was not the democratic process is the best process. I'm not sure that it is. But I'm saying to play to the ears of people who like to talk about democracy and will of the people and this and that, I'm trying to make a point from their point of view. So that's what I was doing.
Okay. Well, I don't buy that. I don't think rights come from democratic processes.
No, I don't think my rights come from the government, and I don't think my rights come from God. I know that you're making that assumption about me and probably other people who argue for rights by me, but there are some people that think that rights should exist just because we're people, that it comes from being a human being, and as a human being, you have a natural born right. Okay? Now, obviously, the United States actually uses this in some of its founding documents in talking about what kind of rights that we should have. Whether or not they're codified by the state doesn't actually matter to me whether I think people should have rights or not, right? Just because the state decides, oh, we don't have this right anymore, doesn't mean I think, oh, I guess we shouldn't have it either, because the state decides it. I mean, really, like that's not how my thinking works.
I mean, it just comes down to your arbitrary belief on what rights are then. I mean, you don't know, it's just whatever I believe, right? Because if someone says, yes, I believe humans have rights, but then they also consider the unborn a viable life and that the unborn should have the rights as well, then they disagree with you. It's just a matter of your own opinion then.
But there are still reasons why I think humans should have rights, right? If you were arguing to me, Andrew, that I think a rock should have rights, right? You should be able to like convince me of that, because I don't think like rocks on their own should be, be able to vote. You know what I mean? Okay. Like why should they be able to? You have to at least have, I can at least give you reasons to demonstrate why it's a good idea. And yes, it is somewhat arbitrary, but at the same time, it's not indefensible, right? There's a bit of a difference there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so how do you defend the abortion of a baby that's not a baby that, you know, when you stick the pincers in to get it, its arms start moving to protect itself against the pincers. Or
that doesn't happen.
Baby that's 9
Andrew,
months.
I've performed abortions, and that does not happen.
It does. I mean, it's literally documented.
No, it doesn't.
Your one person experience.
Andrew, remind me, what's your medical background, my friend? What's your experience with this?
I have a biology degree. I've done I have 10 doctors in my family I'm related to. I mean, more by marriage.
Okay.
I mean,
So you have a biology degree, and you think that when abortions happen, they take pincers into people and pull babies out?
It's not actually a pincer.
No, I don't know what you mean. That's exactly what you said. Do you know what an abortion actually looks like? Do you know what happens?
They actually look different depending on what stage of the pregnancy it is. So
that's right. Question. That's correct. And which part of the pregnancy do they stick the pincers in? I'm just curious.
No, it's not. The word is not pincer. I forget the word, but it's like some sort of metal instrument where they stick it in, and they, you know, rip the baby out essentially. And the fact.
So Andrew, you're using emotionally charged language and value loaded language, and we don't use that clinically. What is usually done is something like a dilation and curettage, right? Where you remove the lining of the uterus during pregnancy, and the products of conception are embedded somewhere in there. Or if the pregnancy is far enough along, you induce labor. And then you say, well, either the fetus will survive or it won't. And then you manage the life of the fetus based on its viability.
I mean, and you're using a distancing language by calling it just a fetus, and I mean, it all comes down to
fetus is the technical term.
No, but okay, so
it's not a person, right? It's at least most places don't grant it personhood. I would argue that even like the United States, even with this, doesn't grant personhood to fetuses.
Still a pregnant woman that's like double homicide. So I mean, it's kind of murky there. But I don't even take the legal stance. I don't take the legal stance as my main authority. I mean, I don't know where it comes down to an arbitrary of I believe this versus you believe that. There's no greater standing, and I think lots of people do consider. I mean, there's no difference physically between a baby 1 minute before it comes out of the birth canal versus after. So I mean, it's really hard for my.
I mean, I think there are there's actually a lot of physiologic differences, Andrew, and I would encourage you to go read maybe go back to your biology textbooks from your degree. What do you mean? There's huge changes in the pressures. Like for instance, they're suddenly having to breathe on their own, so they have to cough out all of the amniotic fluid that they were breathing into their lungs. That's one thing. They have to start respirating on their own. They're no longer getting their nutrients and their blood flow from the placenta, right? There's a lot of physiologic changes that go on in the first few minutes after a baby is born.
Not if the placenta hasn't been cut, and you're talking about environmental change.
Yes, it is.
It doesn't have a third leg. There's no extra arm. There's no extra organ.
Who cares?
It's the same physical matter.
Who cares?
Oh, God. I mean, I care. I mean, I think you're.
That some infants are born with additional like limbs and stuff, right?
Okay, even if that were true, they would still have the limb 1 minute before it came out of the birth canal. There's no.
So what is your point, Andrew?
My point is that is. I mean, I'm getting into a deeper argument of what I think is life and not. And, some people might even say, I don't value life.
Why is life relevant? You're talking about the question you're trying to ask, I think, is you're trying to see where we should grant personhood rights to an individual. Right? You're saying it's arbitrary. It's arbitrary to make it birth. I agree.
Okay. Well, again, like grant rights, I think rights come from, so we're God, so we're at a different place anyway. Yeah. But I mean, if there's fertilization that takes place, if that is left to natural processes, there will be a baby that's born. So that's
maybe
I think it happens. Fertilization.
Maybe.
if there's not, huge health complications, whatever, a baby is going to be born left to natural process.
No,
so that is not necessarily true at all.
There's a much less than 50% chance that any fertilized embryo is actually going to result in a viable life. Less than 50%.
Okay, so
again, I would encourage you to go read a biology textbook.
Yeah.
So at that point, you're saying whether or not how viable it is what matters. But I mean, there are living humans that are not viable. So I think that's a terrible argument.
Correct. Why? I've also done organ retrieval operations on people who are air quotes not viable, right? We do that because we recognize that there is something that is no longer granting the person the same rights.
And Andrew, if you were listening to the call earlier, MD Aware criticized the viability argument. Like, he doesn't think it's the best criteria to use.
It's a practical criterion that we use.
And what do you think the criteria is? Because I don't actually know. I mean, I guess I can't attack a position if I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I think that's good. Good point. But
I'll tell you what I think. I think that an individual's rights are related to their ability to suffer, their ability to feel or experience well-being, and the relationships they have with other people, which is why I think the fact that we're giving this choice to women and people with uteruses is important, because they are going to be the ones who have the most invested. And if they say, I don't actually care to continue this pregnancy, then that diminishes the value of that air quotes life.
Okay. By that,
Andrew, we have to move on. We've got other people that we need to talk to, and there's probably going to be other people that'll make your points. If you really want to talk with other people about it, feel free to go to some other discussion groups and some of the links.
Tweet at me, Andrew, or email me.
But we got to get going with this call. So thanks again for your time. But I'm going to use my power as an unelected official to terminate this call. But my rights were given by God, so you're going to have to deal with it. So anyway, MD, what did you think of that call?
I think it took a long time to get down to brass tacks, we'll say.
I think so too. I think there's obviously problems with saying that states' rights are the best, because they're not. I think we talked about that. And we also both agree that how we define personhood, how we define what happens in a pregnancy, and when we can get to the point of personhood and giving that thing rights, it's complicated, but it's not completely arbitrary. Like, yes, there are things you have to consider that are going to vary from individual to individual. There are subjective points of reason, but there are some things that aren't. There are some things that just aren't, and we can look at that and still formulate how we can come to a consensus on what we believe to be right, what we believe to be wrong. It's not completely arbitrary.
And I mean, if I can differ, or disagree with you to a certain extent, maybe it's just a language thing, but
yeah,
you were saying, I think people with uteruses should have rights. And I'm saying I think they do have rights, and that certain states are choosing to not recognize those rights. Right.
I think they should. I guess when I say it, they should have rights recognized by the state, and they don't. But that's what it is.